First thing I want to draw attention to is the word rebels, rather than the use of Rebel Alliance as a proper title. In addition, the text draws attention to the character of Luke Skywalker, whose name is mentioned twice in this opening crawl. In comparison, the crawling text in A New Hope focused on an overarching conflict between the Empire and the Rebellion, which, as we are aware, is the main conflict spanning across all three of the original films. And meanwhile, the crawling text in The Empire Strikes Back mentions Luke once, but does so in reference to Luke's association with the Rebellion. So what's changed here as far as Return of the Jedi is concerned? What has Luke Skywalker become between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, for example? What does it matter whether or not he, as an individual, knows what the Galactic Empire is up to? This question is drawn from an overarching question pertaining to the importance of Luke Skywalker in the world of Star Wars. And what I plan to explore here is whether or not the amount of import the audience places upon the series' primary protagonist has been conflated with the amount of import the character has within the world in which the character is featured. Note here, I don't intend to deny the importance of Luke's having destroyed the original Death Star, which was undoubtedly significant. Rather, I want to draw more attention to aspects such as Luke's having been part of a squadron that helped achieve that very goal. He didn't do this alone. And furthermore, that said squadron was also organized by a much larger entity, the Rebel Alliance. In other words, Luke Skywalker is important, but he's also a cog in a much larger system. Yet the opening crawl in Return of the Jedi makes little reference to that system and places more importance upon the cog. And so what exactly does this mean moving into Return of the Jedi? What about the story writing has changed? Because it seems to me that George Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan, the screenwriters for Return of the Jedi, laxed on whatever world-building enterprises they'd established within the previous two films, and instead they came up with a fun excuse to bring the gang back together again for another adventure. As such, Luke has become something more than the vessel by which the audience was vicariously experiencing the world of Star Wars. Rather, Luke borders on a wish-fulfillment character here. And while I'm not sure if there's anything inherently wrong with that, it leaves one wanting in comparison to what the previous two films established. One can consider Luke's humble beginnings. He was a serf, a hand working on a farm, yet he has great aspirations. He wants to become something greater than he is. And this iteration is common enough in storytelling. The audience readily invests themselves into Luke's character, as his journey is relatable on a very basic, yet meaningful level. We too want to transcend our mundane lives, to become more than what we are. And so you have Obi-Wan Kenobi setting Luke on this path in A New Hope. He told Luke that he was taking his first steps into a larger world.
I did feel something. I could almost see the remote.
That's good. You've taken your first step into a larger world.
In the grand scheme of things, Luke was a very small player. And in terms of how insurmountable the obstacles about him were, the only way for Luke to become big and strong enough to succeed was to join an organization spanning the galaxy, fighting the tyranny of the Empire. In other words, the Rebel Alliance, the organization, is first and foremost. Luke Skywalker is secondary. He is a character through whom the audience immerses themselves into this larger world. Yet through The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Luke has not only entered this larger world, but he also risks overshadowing it. Let's begin with The Empire Strikes Back. The Empire Strikes Back opens on Hoth, a snow-filled planet where a secret rebel base is situated. The Empire invades the planet, and the rebels are forced to retreat. Yet after Luke, Leia, and Han escape the planet, the conflict between the Empire and the Rebellion is seemingly all but forgotten. And then the film is now all about our small band of characters, and so you have Luke training on the planet Dagobah, while the evil Lord Darth Vader hunts down the Millennium Falcon. At what point does one ask, what about the war? What happened to the Rebel Alliance? The adventure, as it continues, simply involves the characters we were introduced to in the first film, and in this manner the franchise is basically shifting the audience's perception as to what the most important aspects to this franchise essentially are. But is that really the way it should be?
Vader wants us all dead.
He doesn't want you at all. He's after somebody called Skywalker.
Luke.
Lord Vader set a trap for him.
And we're the bait.
Yeah, well, he's on his way.
And in reference to Vader's wanton use of Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters, and the personnel commanding them, all intent on searching for Han and Leia, one wonders if Grand Moff Tarkin would have been so overly zealous about chasing the Falcon, given the losses that Vader sustains amidst the asteroid field. Yet even so, Vader pressed on. Now the reason Vader did this is revealed in a conversation he has with the Emperor.
There is a great disturbance in the Force.
I have felt it.
We have a new enemy, Luke Skywalker.
Yes, my master.
He could destroy us.
He's just a boy. Obi-Wan can no longer help him.
The Force is strong with him. The son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi.
But this scene comes not before, but amidst Vader scouring the asteroid field for the Falcon in the first place. So unless Vader read this script and realized beforehand that he needed to capture Han and Leia to draw out Luke, what was the point of all of this? Why stake so many Imperial resources for the sake of one rebel ship? The Empire Strikes Back does not give the audience an adequate reason as to why Luke's Jedi ascendancy is such a threat to the Empire. Why fear a single Jedi? We know from a writing standpoint that the antagonist must be opposed to the protagonist. Even so, without a proper in-universe explanation as to why, then one begins to sense the man behind the curtain. And yet the show goes on. One might assume that Luke's Jedi ascendancy would turn him into a beacon of hope for the rebellion, and perhaps the Emperor is afraid that Luke will train more Jedi down the road. However, that's just my own headcanon. That's not supported by the film itself. What exactly did Yoda mean when he told Luke that he would destroy everything his friends had fought for if he made the effort to go to Cloud City and save them? If Luke died and or failed to become a Jedi, then does that really mean that the entire rebellion would fail? Why? Why would the failure or the success of the Rebel Alliance hinge on a single person, even a Jedi?
Decide you must, how to serve them best. If you leave now, help them you could, but you would destroy all for which they have fought and suffered.
And this issue isn't simply relegated to the original trilogy, and the importance placed on characters like Anakin Skywalker and Rey. For as we head into Disney's sequel trilogy, the story hinges on finding Luke Skywalker and bringing him back so that he can, somehow, stop the newly established First Order. But again, why is Luke Skywalker so damn important?
You don't need Luke Skywalker.
In The Empire Strikes Back, we had the reveal that Darth Vader, a preeminent force in the Empire, just so happened to be the father of Luke Skywalker. Which is highly coincidental, for instance, in terms of a galactic-scale conflict. What are the odds that the man who was so instrumental in destroying the first Death Star also happens to be the son of Darth Vader? And when you have coincidences like this, the risk that you take, as a writer, is making your world become far more synchronized with a small bubble of characters, thereby relegating the larger world to a standpoint of insignificance.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
A good example of this would be how the Spider-Man world is depicted, with characters like Norman Osborn or Eddie Brock having established ties with Peter Parker before they eventually become villains and fight Spider-Man. It's a small world when so many villains that Spider-Man fights just so happen to be formally acquainted with him. Funnily enough, Spider-Man creator, Stan Lee, would mention how his co-artist, Steve Ditko, had originally conceived the villain Green Goblin as being someone of whom Peter Parker had no prior acquaintance, on the basis that villains in real life are often people we do not know. But compare this with what the prequel films did with characters like C-3PO, and his having been built by a young Anakin Skywalker, or R2-D2 having served aboard Queen Amidala's royal cruiser, and Obi-Wan Kenobi meets a young Boba Fett, or Master Yoda meets a young Chewbacca, and so on. All of these things create a world based on dramatic happenstance, and one is left asking oneself what is with all these damn coincidences. And in relation to those coincidences, is it any wonder that there were so many expectations surrounding the conception of Rey's character in the sequel trilogy? There were so many folks that thought that she must be a blood relative to Luke Skywalker, or Emperor Palpatine. Those kinds of expectations come as a result of this kind of storytelling, that the larger world, as old Ben had put it, shrinks into meaninglessness. And before long, the audience's perception of the world will be that we are to remain almost exclusively tied to these celebrity characters. All the while dead Bothans and droid attacks on Wookiees will only receive a passing mention, before we head off to see Luke Skywalker save his father.